Having had your fill of paella, which I wouldn't because I don't eat fish, and also as in part one when I was in a Paris cafe on Jim's trip, I wouldn't be drinking cafe au lait and eating eclairs either. Anyway, having had your fill of paella, you head off to Lisbon. It's a long route with stops and transfers on the way. Have you read a book that feels like it wasn't ever going to end? Well, this year is my year of reading mammoths. I set myself the task of reading 10 books of 600 pages plus, some of which I had started before and put down, others which I hadn't ever picked up but were on my bookshelf for a while. And the main challenge for me was that the ones I had picked up and started and then put them down. I put them down because I just had that sort of mental sense of I want to read other stuff, and the commitment to reading this book is so great that it's going to put off me reading anything else for quite a long while. And that's really what I wanted to challenge in this thing. So I set myself the task of reading 10 mammoths this year, and up to the end of July my target was six out of the 7 months, because July I wanted to leave 3 for my own book, which was coming out, and I'm on course. I've read 6 out of the first 7 months. I need to read another one in August. I am halfway through one that again I picked up I think in June, made good progress on it, and then have put it down in order to read another mammoth in July. Anyway, you don't need to get to the details of that. So, but one that I have still to come to this year is The Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. I'm on page 240 something of that from the last time I picked it up for March of the Mammoths. I think that book will never end, and I also suspect there's a chance I might DNF it, which doesn't happen to me very often. Finally, after much travel, you arrive in Lisbon, a beautiful city that has large parts of the city destroyed in the Great Earthquake of 1755. Have you ever experienced an earthquake, tornado, hurricane or some such force of nature? Well, I live in Britain where we don't have huge extremes of climate, although the one that we did experience was in 1987, a great storm that ripped up many trees, including 6 of Seven Oak trees. Seven Oaks is a town in Kent named after its 7 oak trees, of which now only one remains. But the thing about that storm was that I think a lot of people, me included, because it sort of hit during the small hours, we slept through it, and we only woke up the next day to the carnage on our streets. So I experienced the aftermath of the weather event, not the weather event itself. I will say that personally, the most weather threatened I've ever been was I was playing football. How old would I be? I don't know, 21, 22, something like that. No, it was earlier than that, sort of 17, 18. And our home ground was Wormwood Scrubs, I think. And that is sort of an area, sort of bleak area of wasteland between the Paddington Railway marshalling yards at one end and Wormwood Scrubs prison on the other, where the prisoners used to sort of clamber up to the bars on their window and shout at us players. Really bleak sort of vista. But I was playing there one day and it started hailing in the middle of the game, and I was so cold at that point that I actually lost my bearings of where I was on the pitch. It only lasted about 5 minutes, but I was completely sort of befuddled by that. Lisbon was the hometown of Fernando Pessoa. Have you read anything by him? I haven't, but I do have this, The Book of Disquiet, which is possibly his most well-known one. It's supposed to be quite sort of experimental. Now, I was supposed to be doing a buddy read with, I think, 2 or 3 other people of this a couple of years ago. But when it came to sort of time to fix, a precise, month when we were going to do it, we all sort of went, and we never got around to it. I think we all sort of backed out of it, so without ever sort of expressly stating that. I will get to it one day, but I don't know when. Pessoa was, interestingly, Pessoa published just 4 books in his lifetime, and 3 of them were in English. He also translated books like The Scarlett Letter by Hawthorne and poems by Poe into Portuguese. Do you read many translated works, and what are some of your favourites? Yeah, I do. I probably read a third of my fiction output each year is novels in translation. some of my favourites. Well, this year there is David Diop's Booker International winning At Night All Blood is Black. There's Nervous System by the Chilean writer Lina Meruan. Those are two books off the top of my head. I've read 5 or 6 books by the Italian 1970s author Leonardo Sciascia. They all translated from Italian. So yeah, I mean, I do. Pessoa was fond of the odd drink or 10. You head up to the city of Porto, famous for, among other things, port, a drink of fortified wine. Do you have a favourite tipple now and again? If you do not drink alcohol, what then is your favourite first quenching beverage? I don't drink alcohol. Water is my favourite beverage. I mean, I only drink water, orange juice or orange juice smoothies and the odd can of Pepsi. That's it. I don't drink anything else. I suppose if I'm feeling under the weather, I'd probably drink hot Ribena, but I haven't had one of those for 2 years. Porto is home to the Livraria Lello, a beautiful bookshop that, unfortunately, due to a tenuous link to the Harry Potter films, has now become a bit of a tourist attraction. Have you got a favourite bookshop and or library? I certainly have a favourite library, which was the old British Museum Library. It's now since moved into a bespoke high-tech library in King's Cross, which I don't have a reader's card for, so I can't enter it like I used to in the British Library. So the British Library was in the British Museum, and you were sat under the beautiful sort of cupola dome. And Karl Marx, amongst other erudite people, researched there for, I think, his book Capital. He read British authors like David Ricardo and stuff. So I've said this before, but I had a friend who wanted to be a Tory MP, which, if you don't know, is the Conservative right in this country. And he every time he went to the British Library, he sat at a different seat each time, because he wanted to cover all the seats to say that he had sat at the same seat that Karl Marx had sat at, which I think is sort of quite enlightened for a Tory. Although whether my friend knew that Marx had boils and piles, I don't know, although I suspect 100 years plus later the risk of infection was probably low. Oh yes, bookshops. Yeah, my favourite bookshops have all sort of closed down, really, sadly. So I'm sort of rediscovering, well, not really, I'm sort of discovering new bookshops all the time. So the first bookshop I was able to visit in the whole of the pandemic, I went to a couple of weeks ago, was Brick Lane Books near Whitechapel. That was great. I've also been to Libraria, which is near there. That's also super. There's the bookshop in Dalston where my Three Dreams of the Kia G was launched, which is the Burley Fisher books. But I think my favourite bookshops really are second-hand bookshops, because when I go to bookshops which deal in new books, there's not that much that I get from them. You get more pleasant surprises from second-hand bookshops. So my favourite in London is called Scoob Books, again sort of near King's Cross. On to the next one. The Douro River runs through Porto, and the old town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site with its 6 bridges across the river. Have you visited any UNESCO sites, and if so, tell us about some of them? I don't know. I haven't actually looked at what are and aren't UNESCO world sites, so I can't really answer this. I mean, I have been to the Acropolis, which I assume is one, but unfortunately the Acropolis is perpetually buried behind scaffolding these days because of the pollution in Athens. So I would offer Split, which I talked about in my part 1 of this video. I don't know if it's a UNESCO world site. And also Dubrovnik, again, I don't know if it's a world heritage site. I should have done my research to this question. Finding yourself in a particularly devout mood, unlikely, and with a lot of time on your hands, you decide to walk to the Portuguese Camino de Santiago all the way to Santiago de Compostela, which will take you between 10 and 12 days. If you're not up to it, you can grab a bus there in 3.5 hours. Do you enjoy walking, hiking? What is the longest walk you've ever done? I don't enjoy walking and hiking. I don't walk anywhere, or I find it hard to walk anywhere where there isn't a destination. at the end of it, so I don't just walk for the sake of walking. So even during lockdown, I find it very hard to go out for a walk. I think Anne Carson wrote of a similar sort of devout journey, walking 10 to 12 days might have been her book Decreation. It was kind of interesting, but not the devout aspect of it, more the sort of the man that she was walking with, who wasn't someone particularly known to her. And as for the second part of this question, which was, oh yes, what's the longest walk you've done? I don't know for sure, but again, I mentioned it in my part one video of this, and I posted a link to it, when I walked around the Montparnasse cemetery looking for certain famous writers who'd been buried there, and miserably failed to locate them. And I was just walking around and around and around for 3 hours. My video is not 3 hours long, don't worry, I did edit it down. So that was quite a long walk. I also seem to remember I went in my youth to Brands Hatch for a Grand Prix, and we went for the practice days beforehand, when for some reason Brands Hatch station wasn't, the train wasn't stopping there, so we had to go to the next stop and had to walk all the way back to Brands Hatch. And the scariest thing about that was, this is the time of sort of the band Madness's huge success, and we passed through these sort of Kent towns, and all the sort of kids from school, from 8 years old, were dressed in Crombie jackets with skinhead haircuts. It was a very unsettling sight. It had nothing to do with Grand Prix racing. The other longest walk I can remember is when my wife and I last went to Paris, and we walked from our hotel in the 7th arrondissement near the Arc de Triomphe, and we walked all the way to the Latin Quarter, which seemed to take forever, and we got a cab back. After a bit of R&R and some intense foot bathing in Santiago de Compostela, you embark by train to Bilbao, the de facto capital of the Basque Country. The Basque Country was the home to Juan Sebastian Elcano, the man who took over Magellan's circumnavigation of the world after his death. Have you read much non-fiction on discovery and exploration? Are there any interesting books you would recommend to us? So I've read Longitude, which is all about sort of the discovery of sort of how to measure time and all that sort of stuff. But my favourite book, not that I read many, but my favourite book on exploration is during the French Revolution, or just before it broke out, 2 scientists were charged with definitively defining the length of a metre. And they had doing a process of triangulation. So they were walking from Paris out into the countryside and always triangulating back to Paris, and through their calculations they would be able to define a metre. And but they, being scientists, they were regarded as noblemen, and they got into trouble with the revolutionaries, with the Jacobins. These are aristocrats and they should be executed, which they weren't. And they hit all these snags and stuff, and then right at the end, when they came back and defined what a metre was, one of them had this sort of absolute crisis of confidence that he'd made a massive mistake in the calculations. It's a brilliant book. I can't remember exactly what it was called. I'll put the link down to it. It was part of one of my 6 degrees of literary separation videos that I did on BookTube around the launch of my novel 3 Dreams of the Kyrgyz, because in there's a whole section about the male nature of measurement and how it's destructive for the planet, which seems quite timely. I wrote that back, or it's published back in 2018, and it seems even more timely now. Not far from Bilbao lies the town of Guernica, made famous by the atrocities committed there during the Spanish Civil War by the Luftwaffe in support of General Franco's fascists. These atrocities are commemorated in Pablo Picasso's painting Guernica. Picasso is known for being an influential figure in both the Cubist and Surreal movements. Are you a fan? Have you got a favourite artistic school or movement? I'm a fan of Picasso. My wife and I went to his museum in Paris. I've been a couple of times, but I went with my wife, and we managed to do it backwards. So we started, we ended up in his blue period, which wasn't great. I like the idea of Cubism better than how he executed it. He brought so many sort of extraneous, external references such as African masks and things. And I found it rather got in the way of what Cubism was trying to express. And I think Georges Braque is more pleasing in that respect. But my faivourite artistic movement is the abstract expressionists, people like Mondrian, and particularly Mark Rothko, who's my favourite artist, head and shoulders above everybody else. From Bilbao you travel to Barcelona. In Barcelona you visit the Camp Nou, home to the Barcelona football team. In many, the national team of Catalonia. I think for many, the national team of Catalonia. Are you a football soccer fan? If not, what sports do you like? Do you ever go to matches, meets and events, etc.? Okay, so I'd like to talk about Barcelona FC, because there's a great wailing and gnashing of teeth in that city, because they've had to lose the greatest existing player, who earns £50 million a month, because they are in such financial peril that they can't afford his salary without it basically bringing the club to his knees. And the club are basically saying that they've had their hand forced by the league, who are insisting on regulations about financial sort of fair play and sort of sound finances. And they're saying the league have forced us to lose and the whole of Spain to lose the best player in the world. I have no sympathy with this, even though one would rather support Barcelona as the Catalonian club as against Real Madrid, which was Franco's club, the club of the fascists. They have not a leg to stand on. They brought this about by their own profligacy, buying players, putting them on crazy salaries. And as I say, I have no sympathy for them, and I think it's outrageous that they are blaming the Spanish Football League for upholding its rules and regulations. I used to like football a lot more than I do now. Money has ruined it. My favourite sport to watch is baseball, American baseball, which has equally inflationary salaries, it's true, but it's the sport I watch the most. I used to really like cricket. I don't really watch it anymore. I like playing darts. I don't really watch darts. I used to play football, cricket. I play any other sports? Darts, obviously, I still play. Rugby I had to play at school, and I played one game at university just to say I'd done it. But I'm now 57 and too old for all that sort of stuff. And I no longer go to sports events. You decide not to stay too long in Barcelona and instead move on back to France and up the Mediterranean coast to the nice town of Nice, passing through the town of Cannes on the way. Cannes is, of course, well known in the film industry and has one of the industry's most glamorous film festivals. What are a few of your favourite films? What was one of the most disappointing films you've seen? Well, my favourite film of all time is Apocalypse Now. But I suppose I have a taste for good gangster movies, both British, French and American. So Get Carter and The Long Good Friday are my two favourite British gangster movies. French, or a lot of the Belmondo gangster movies and the Alain Delon gangster movies I really like. And I watch a lot of I have watched a lot of gangster movies. I like a lot of the sort of Jimmy Cagney gangster movies, Edward G. Robinson movies, but I also like modern ones as well. So yeah, that's probably my main taste in movies. Disappointing movies, too many to mention. Heading further up the Mediterranean coast, we arrive in a new country, Italy, and the city of Genoa, where we will pause our journey for now. And if interest remains in this little tag, we will pick up our trip in the former home of Christopher Columbus. Until then, grazie mille e arrivederci.